Hey everybody, Al Noraker here for KastKing. Today we're on beautiful Granby Lake in Colorado. We're sitting at about 8,200 feet right now. It's early spring, or late spring, just kind of going into the summertime. You know, and typically when I'm out here on Granby, I'm fishing for lake trout because there are some giant lake trout here. It's a rather deep lake. I'm sitting at 160 feet right now as I look on my graph. Lake trout here go from 5 pounds up to 30, 40 pounds. There's some really great lake trout here. One of the reasons there's so many lake trout and they get so big here is this lake is also full of kokanee salmon. Now let's talk a little bit about kokanee. If you've ever gone to Alaska, and I hope you have because it's an incredible place to go, you've probably fished for sockeye salmon. Now a sockeye is the big brother, the cousin if you will, of a kokanee salmon. The difference is up in the saltwater areas, all along the west coast, all the way to Alaska, sockeye salmon will spawn in the freshwater, but they live most of their life out in the saltwater, and that's where they get really, really big. Then they come back in and go through that spawning cycle in the freshwater areas. And that's typically where fishermen, the anglers, are targeting those fish, either with fly rods, casting rods, spinning rods, that type of thing, as they're moving up prior to that spawning stage where their bodies turn that bright red color, big green heads, get that big hooked jaw. That's later in the spawning cycle and they're not good to eat then. But prior to that, sockeye salmon are known as some of the best eating fish that swim. Of the 4 species of salmon, you got silver salmon, which is Coho, you've got king salmon or Chinook salmon, you've got pinks, you've got sockeye, but sockeye salmon, probably one of my favorite for eating. It's a bright red meat. They're great on the barbecue. They're great for smoking as well, but really great when you fillet those. Now, kokanee salmon are just the smaller cousin. They never see saltwater. Obviously, we're nowhere close to the ocean out here, but they have a very similar life cycle. These fish live most of their lives in the lakes, and then in the fall time, after they get to that 3 to 5 year stage within their life cycle, they'll actually move up into the gravel bars shallow or into the river inlets as the rivers come into a big lake like this for their spawning cycle. So they're treating this Lake Granby and other lakes around as their saltwater ocean. And then they simply move up into those tributaries, those small inlet rivers, to do their spawning. Now that life cycle, like I said, can last 3, maybe 5 years. So you'll get a wide range of size of kokanee. Now, kokanee are a really kind of interesting fish because they're not necessarily a meat-eating fish. They eat zooplankton. Now, the zooplankton can vary in depth, and that's why, as I'm looking at my graph right here, we're sitting now in 158 feet of water, and I'm seeing fish ranging from a few in that 40 to 50 range, but I'm seeing a lot of them at 120 to 130 feet. So this time of year, they're getting down there pretty deep right now, and that'll change depending on water temperature, but really what they're targeting is what they're eating, that forage, that zooplankton. So they'll raise up and down in the water column to have the best bet of getting full and fed and growing big. So you really need good electronics to target kokanee. Let's talk about a few other ways to catch kokanee. Obviously we're fishing quite deep here, anywhere from 40 to 120 feet, and that's not always an easy thing. So let's talk about how we're going to accomplish that. So again, if we're going to be successful kokanee fishing, we've got to get our baits down to where they live. And again, I'm looking at fish here over 100 feet right now. I mean, that'll vary depending on where we're at on this lake, but right now they're quite deep. Getting down to 100 feet where you're trolling 1.1 to 1.3 miles an hour is not an easy thing to do. Most people, when you're fishing that deep, you're going to see guys fishing with downriggers. So that downrigger system is very accurate. You can attach your main line right to a release clip, drop that downrigger ball, and you have a line counter on your downrigger ball. You drop that right down to exactly where you're seeing most of those fish suspended, and then you're going to troll at 1.1 to say 1.3, maybe a little bit quicker in some cases. And so you know that your bait is already there. Now let's be serious here. Downrigger fishing is expensive. Some of the electric downriggers, you know, they might be $700–800 a piece. Even manual ones, probably $200 to $400 a piece. So it may be out of the possibility for some fishermen. Also, some boats don't work very well with downriggers. It's a little bit hard to mount those on the gunnels. Now, I don't have any downriggers on this boat, but I want to share with you a couple techniques that I've found that I can get down and fish for these fish at any depth. Now, it's a little, I gotta be honest, it's gonna be a little more difficult to get over 100 feet. But anything between 40 and 80 feet, I can easily target with the two techniques that I'm gonna share with you today. And let's kind of go through those. So we're gonna talk about the gear first of all for kokanee. Then we'll talk about how we're gonna get down to their depth. Kokanee actually have a fairly soft mouth. So when you fish for kokanee, you want to be using a rod that is pretty soft. You'll notice that this rod has a lot of bend, a lot of action to it, because we don't want to pull those hooks out of that fish's mouth. Okay, so we're going to use a fairly soft rod. These are not giant fish. Great eating, but they're not giants, okay? This happens to be the new Krome Kokanee Krush rod. It's really made specifically for kokanee fishing, again, because of that soft tip action. And you'll also notice here that it's got this beautiful bright orange tip, which really allows you to see that subtle bite. When you're down there 40, 60 feet, you need to be able to recognize when you've got that fish on, so you're not just dragging them along there. Okay. Now, this rod comes in 3 different sizes, 7.5, 8, and 8.5 feet long. Most of the time we're fishing kokanee, we're trolling. Now I'm going to talk to you about a vertical jig technique as well, but most of the time we're trolling. So we've actually added these really nice carbon handles. They come in and out of rod holders very, very easily. Really a great system. One real critical piece to kokanee fishing, kokanee trolling, and really trolling for a lot of species like walleye, salmon, a lot of different things, is a good line counter reel. KastKing has just introduced the new ReKon line counter. It comes in 2 different sizes. Now, this particular one right here is the size 10. It's going to hold tons of lines, got a beautiful line counter, double handle, great ball bearings, but the line counter is the key here because I need to be able to target specifically the same depth over and over. Once I find the fish and I know how deep that they're feeding, now I want to be able to go back to that exact same spot once I've caught a fish. So the line counter, being able to duplicate what I'm doing, is critically important. Now, on the business end, what we're doing here is we're trolling with some techniques that are very similar to salmon fishing. So we're using a flasher. This happens to be like a rainbow trout type flasher. They're not feeding on rainbow trout. This is simply an attractor. And then somewhere about 18 to 24, maybe 30 inches behind that flasher, we're going to have a small little spinner blade. And there's lots of different kinds, and I'll show you some different examples of those. Now, let me show you one other way that we can do this besides just a flasher, and then we'll talk about how we get down to where those fish live. Now, I want to show you a little bit different rig than just a normal flasher like you've seen here with that spinner rig. This is something that is very, very popular for salmon fishing out on the west coast and in the ocean. This is called a Pro Troll flasher. Now this one is the smaller size. The big ones that you use for salmon out in the ocean are actually longer. I think they're about 11 inches long, but it's just a smaller version of that. So this is kind of a snubber, and it goes right up to your main line. We're going to attach that to the main line here in a minute. I'll show you that when we talk about the weight system. And then this flasher spins around in a 360-degree fashion to attract the fish. And again, behind that, about 24 inches, we're going to use this little lure right here. This is called a Brad's cut plug lure. And it's really, really a cool little bait. I like it in bigger sizes for trout, lake trout even, and certainly salmon out on the west coast. Alaska, the Columbia River, the ocean. But this is a small size, and what's really cool about this is I can put that same double hook rig behind it, separated with about 5 or 6 beads just to give some separation, because kokanee are traditionally a real short striker. So they may nip at it a few times when looking at this bait, but they'll hit the hooks further back. So you definitely want to separate your hooks a little bit further away from your actual bait. Now what's cool about the Brad's cut plug is I can actually open up this little scent chamber right here. And if you look inside there, you'll notice it has a little foam pad. And I can put some scent on that, again, as a fish attractant. So we're going to use a little bit of scent inside the cut plug, the Brad's cut plug, and then we're going to use a setback of 5 or 6 beads down to a double hook setup with maybe a couple pieces of corn tipped on that. And then we're just going to use this big flasher to attract the fish. Okay, so those are just 2 examples. There's lots of different ways. People use small little hoochies, they use other type of spinner blades. There's lots of different ways to catch these kokanee. But what I want to show you now is how we're going to get down to those fish, because again, you know, we're talking 40 to 80, even over 100 feet deep, and we've got to get our baits down to that. So there's going to be 2 different ways we're going to do this today. Let's start with this rig up right over here. Okay, so I'm going to show you how we rig this up. As you can see, I've already attached the Pro Troll flasher back to the Brad's cut plug lure back here. Got my snubber, and I'm attached to my main line. What you're going to notice right here is I have this sliding piece. This is where I'm going to attach my weight. Okay, I have in my hand here a 5-ounce cannonball sinker. Now that's what we're going to start with today. Now over trial and experience and testing, you'll get pretty good at getting dialed into what depth you can reach depending on what weight you use, how fast you're trolling, and how much line you let out of your rod. So it's a pretty simple process from this point. We're just going to set all of our gear into the water, and just like that. Now here's the critical part. I've got my line counter reel. I know that I want to reach, in this particular case, I want to be down about 60 feet. That's pretty average. From what I'm seeing right here, I've got a lot of fish in that 60-foot zone. So given about 1.1 miles an hour, 5 ounces on this cannonball, I'm going to let out just exactly 120 feet of line, and I know I'm going to be right in that 60-foot range. So it's just a matter of watching your line counter. We're going to drop that right down there. Now you can put a clicker on here if you want, but it doesn't go out quite as fast. It's a good indication of what's going on, but when I'm dropping it down, I typically just let it go. So we're at about 60 feet right now. Doesn't take long, and I can actually look right on my graph, and I'm seeing my weight because my cannonball is dropping down right behind the transducer behind the boat. And there we are at 120 feet, and if I look at my graph, I'm right there, right about where most of those fish are swimming. I'm sitting right at 60 feet now, and as we troll, this is going to raise just a little bit, but I'm pretty close in the zone right here. Now it's just simply a matter of putting that rod in the rod holder. What's really nice here again is you've got that nice bright orange strike tip. I can really see what's going on right there. If I get a hit, I know immediately. So that rod is set. We're fishing right there. I can see it on the graph. We're right where the fish are living right now. So feeling pretty good about this one. Now, let's talk about another method, because there's more than one way to skin a cat here. And for any of you guys out there who are walleye fishermen, you'll know the term snap weights, right? Snap weights are used a lot, either with lead core or with regular braided line, to present bait down to walleye at a very specific depth. I have found that I can do the same thing with snap weights with kokanee fishing, and I really like this method. So this is a little bit lighter rod. This is an 8-foot rod, still perfect action. I got to keep my eye on that tip just to make sure we don't go down here as we're talking. But so again, we're going to use this small little spinner. We've got that sling blade on here, but now we're not going to add our weight yet. We're actually going to use our line counter, and we're going to let that line feed out behind the boat about 50 feet. I just want to get some distance behind us here and create that spread. We're about 30 feet right now. It goes out really nice and smooth. Now, as soon as that bait gets about 50 feet behind the boat, now I'm going to add my weight. Well, how am I going to do that when I haven't attached anything to the line yet? This is the advantage of snap weights, because I can add them at virtually any time. And I've got one sitting right here, just like this. And it's got this little quick release. It's like an offshore tackle release that you'd use for a side planer or a downrigger type of thing. And now all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my fishing line, and I'm going to attach that snap weight to my braided line, just like that. And it's not going to come off. Now, I happen to add 4 ounces of lead, so it's a little bit less than this one. So at the same trolling speed, I'm going to need to let out a little bit more line to get down to that same depth. But just that fast now, I've got a 50-foot spread behind the boat with my lure, my flasher, and my bait. And now I'm down 120 feet right now. Remember, I already let it back 50, so I'm really only down 70 at that point when I got to 120. And in order, so it's a little bit of math here, right, guys? I know fishing shouldn't be math, but in this case it is. So we're going to let this one go about 150 feet. So I've got actually I'm going to go 170 feet, including my setback of 50. So there we go, 170 feet. And just that fast, we've reached that magic depth. Should be right where the fish are again. I can set this drag really light, turn on the clicker, so if I get a fish, I know just like that. I'm going to put this rod right into the rod holder, just like that. Now we've got 2 rigs set up. We're fishing pretty close to depths. I set this one about 10 feet shallower than this one right here. And now it's just a waiting game. But we know that we've got our baits in exactly the right spot. We've got good gear out there. And hey, we're ready to catch some kokanee. Okay, so let's talk about another really fun way to target kokanee, and that's vertical jigging. So we know that kokanee are a school fish, right? So if you find one, you typically find a lot of them. And we use our electronics now. We're going to find those big schools of fish. We're going to know exactly how deep they are. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit shorter rod. This is a 7.5 foot Krome Kokanee Krush rod. Still has that nice, soft kokanee action. Bright red strike tip so I can really see what's going on. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a vertical type bait. So this is a little spoon, and I'm using braided line. This happens to be 20-pound Cast Pro braid, and I've got about 8 or 9 feet of fluorocarbon leader. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to drop this bait right straight down to these fish. I'm watching them on the graph. I know my transducer is right here at the back of the boat. So as I drop this bait down, I can actually see it fall through the water. I'm watching very carefully, and as it's falling, I see that right now I'm just getting right down to where the fish are. As soon as I'm just right at them, slightly below, then I'll click my reel over and I'll start a nice little vertical jig right on top of those fish, and hopefully I'll be able to get one of them to bite. So if you're out kokanee fishing, you're trolling and you're seeing big schools of fish, don't be afraid. Stop, set your trolling motor so it kind of anchors you in place right there. Get yourself a little bit shorter rod and a nice little jigging type spoon. Drop those right down to the fish. Use your graph, use your electronics. Drop that graph or that spoon right down on top of those fish. Make sure I got a little bit above it right there, so I've got to move it again a little bit. Okay, and I'm just going to stay right on top of those fish. Just little short jig motions like this. And again, the braided line is really important here because I have no stretch. I still want to use that fluorocarbon leader down to my lure, but the braided line lets me see it, and it doesn't stretch when I go to set that hook. So vertical jig technique for kokanee, when you find those schools of fish, can be very, very effective. Trolling when you're searching, vertical jigging when you find those big schools of fish. And that's really, really good in the fall when those fish start to school up a lot, just before they go up into those rivers to spawn, you'll see giant schools of kokanee. I mean, thousands of them together. That's a perfect time for this vertical jig technique. But use your electronics, you're going to enjoy this. So, pretty simple process. Remember, use your electronics. Find the depth that the fish are sitting at. You know, if you're fishing 30 feet above or 30 feet below, you're not going to be successful. Have a nice soft action rod. You need a line counter reel. You try a couple different types of flashers, different colors. You want to attract those schools of fish into where your bait is. That's where you're going to get bit. And then, you know, change colors. I change colors a lot. Like I might even troll only 10-15 minutes here, and then I'm going to change, maybe even less than that. I'm going to change color. If I'm not getting bit, I know I'm in the right zone, has to be the lure, I'm going to change that and use some scent, whether it's that corn, whether it's a liquid scent on your lures, but use some scent, and I think you're going to have a great time kokanee fishing, and I guarantee you, it'll be one of the best freshwater fish that you'll ever eat. Kokanee salmon, landlocked sockeye salmon, kokanee salmon eat just like its big saltwater cousin. They're fabulous. They're easy to catch. You catch a lot of them. It's a great place to take kids because you can catch a lot of kokanee salmon. Hey guys, I'm Al Noraker up here on Lake Granby, beautiful Colorado. Going to go kokanee fishing. I hope you learned something today, and keep following us on KastKing.com, and I'll see you on the water really soon.